When you are older, do not go to these four people's homes, no matter how much free time you have. As you age, your time becomes more valuable. You start to see relationships differently. You realize that some people bring joy and comfort, while others leave you drained and questioning your own worth. Yet, free time can sometimes make you nostalgic or even a little reckless. You may feel tempted to visit people who should remain in your past. But before you knock on certain doors, pause and reconsider. There are four types of people whose homes you should avoid, no matter how much time you have on your hands. Think about it. Studies show that social interactions significantly impact emotional and mental health. Research from the American Psychological Association highlights that toxic relationships can increase stress levels, weaken immune function, and even contribute to cognitive decline. So why put yourself in a situation where you invite unnecessary negativity into your life? Case studies reveal that people who cut off damaging relationships experience improved mental clarity and overall well-being. The first type of person whose home you should never visit is the one who always complains but never changes. We all know someone like this. You sit down, and within minutes, the conversation turns into a therapy session you never signed up for. They complain about their job, their family, their neighbors, and even the weather. You offer advice, encouragement, or at the very least, a listening ear. But months or even years later, nothing has changed. Studies on emotional labor confirm that continuously absorbing negativity from others can cause emotional exhaustion, making you feel tired and irritable even if your own life is going well. People in their later years who repeatedly engage in these one-sided conversations often report feelings of regret for the wasted time. They could have spent those moments doing something fulfilling. The second type of person to avoid is the one who only remembers you when they need something. You might not hear from them for months or years, but the moment they are in trouble, your phone lights up. It is never just a friendly check-in. It is always a request. Maybe they need money. Maybe they need help moving. Maybe they need a favor that requires your time, effort, and energy. The pattern is clear. Research from the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships states that one-sided friendships lead to increased feelings of loneliness and dissatisfaction. Even in older age, people who continue entertaining such relationships often report feeling used and unappreciated. One case study followed retirees who spent years being the go-to person for everyone's problems. Many expressed deep regret, realizing too late that their kindness had been taken for granted. Their biggest mistake was assuming that eventually, these people would return the favor. But they never did. The third person whose home you should never visit is the one who constantly brings up past grievances. You know the type. The moment you sit down, they remind you of that time 10 years ago when you forgot their birthday or made a joke they did not like. No matter how much time has passed, they keep a record of every mistake you ever made. According to a study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, people who hold grudges tend to experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, and even physical health issues like high blood pressure. Holding on to resentment is exhausting. And being around someone who refuses to let go of the past means you will always be walking on eggshells. Older adults who continue engaging with such people report feelings of frustration and even guilt for things they can no longer change. But why spend your valuable years defending yourself for things that no longer matter? The fourth and final type of person to avoid is the one who always brags and makes you feel small. No matter what you say, they have done it better. If you mention a vacation, they have been to a more expensive destination. If you share an achievement, they downplay it and bring up something greater they have accomplished. Social comparison theory, first introduced by psychologist Leon Festinger, explains how constantly being around people who make you feel inferior can lower self-esteem and overall happiness. Studies also show that older adults who frequently compare themselves to others are more likely to experience depression and dissatisfaction with their own lives. A case study from the National Institute on Aging found that retirees who distanced themselves from competitive or boastful individuals felt a greater sense of peace and contentment. The reason is simple. When you remove yourself from unnecessary competition, you begin to appreciate your own journey without someone else diminishing it. So what should you do instead? If you find yourself with extra free time, invest it wisely. Spend time with people who genuinely uplift you. Connect with those who make you laugh, share your interests, or bring out the best in you. Science backs this up. Research from Harvard's study of adult development found that strong positive relationships are the biggest predictor of happiness and longevity. People who prioritize meaningful connections over toxic ones report higher levels of life satisfaction, lower stress, and even improved physical health. Think about the long-term effects of your choices. Do you really want to waste your time in an environment that drains you? Every minute spent with the wrong people is a minute you could have spent reading a good book, exploring a new hobby, or simply enjoying your own company. Life is too short to entertain negativity, and your older years should be about peace, joy, and fulfillment. Avoid these 4 types of people, and you will find yourself with more energy, better mental health, and a happier life. You might be thinking, how do I politely distance myself from these types of people without causing conflict? You know that feeling when you pick up the phone and see a name that makes you hesitate? Or when you sit across from someone and realize the conversation is doing nothing but draining you? At some point, we all encounter relationships that no longer serve us. Maybe it is the chronic complainer who never takes action, the friend who only remembers you when they need something, the person who never lets go of past grievances, or the one who constantly makes you feel small. Whatever the case, you find yourself wondering how to step back without turning things into an emotional battlefield. Studies show that setting boundaries improves mental well-being. A report from the Journal of Social and Clinical Psychology found that people who create healthy distance from toxic relationships experience reduced stress and increased life satisfaction. But here is the challenge. Most of us were raised to be polite, to keep the peace, and to avoid unnecessary drama. So how do you step away without turning it into an argument or lifelong feud? The first step is recognizing that not every relationship deserves an explanation. Often, people feel obligated to sit down and have a deep conversation about why they need space. But in reality, some relationships fade naturally when you stop feeding them. Take a case study from the University of Kansas that examined long-term friendships. It found that most friendships that ended did not involve dramatic breakups. Instead, they dissolved because one or both parties stopped making an effort. If someone only calls you when they need a favor, what happens when you stop picking up every time? They move on to someone else. Now, what if the person does not take the hint? This is where polite but firm communication comes in. You do not need to justify your decision with a long explanation. A simple, "I have been really busy focusing on some personal things, so I might not be as available," works just fine. Research on social interactions from the American Psychological Association suggests that people are more likely to accept changes when they are framed as personal adjustments rather than criticisms of them. Instead of saying, "I cannot keep listening to your complaints," say, "I am trying to focus on more positive things in my life." It shifts the focus to your own growth rather than their behavior. For people who thrive on guilt trips, consistency is key. Some individuals will push back, making comments like, "You have changed," or "You do not care anymore." This is where many people crumble and revert to old habits. A long-term study on emotional boundaries from Harvard found that those who successfully distanced themselves from toxic relationships did so by sticking to their decisions without over-explaining or defending them. If you give in and start justifying yourself, it opens the door for negotiation. But if you keep responses short and consistent, the other person eventually adapts. Let's say the person is a family member. That adds a layer of complexity because complete avoidance is not always possible. But distance can be created in smaller ways. If you have a relative who constantly brings up past grievances, change the subject when they start. If they insist on bringing negativity into every conversation, keep interactions short. Case studies from family therapists show that when individuals limit their engagement with toxic family members, whether by reducing visits or cutting phone calls short, they experience less emotional distress while still maintaining necessary ties. For the friend who always brags and makes you feel small, the key is recognizing that comparison-based relationships rarely change. A study from the National Institute on Aging found that people who remained in friendships based on one-upmanship experienced lower self-esteem over time. If every conversation leaves you feeling diminished, the best approach is to disengage. Compliment them once, then shift the conversation to something neutral. If they insist on turning everything into a competition, reduce how often you see them. Over time, they will either notice the change and adjust their behavior or drift away naturally. One of the biggest concerns people have about distancing themselves is loneliness. What if you step back from these relationships and end up with an empty social life? But research suggests the opposite. A study published in the Journal of Happiness Studies found that people who removed toxic relationships from their lives actually felt more socially fulfilled. Why? because they had more time and emotional energy to invest in meaningful connections. Think of it like cleaning out a closet. When you get rid of things that no longer fit or serve a purpose, you create space for something better. Another way to prevent conflict while creating distance is to make gradual changes instead of abrupt ones. If you usually talk to someone every day, start spacing out the conversations. If you usually say yes to every request, begin saying no to smaller ones first. A behavioral psychology study found that people are less likely to react negatively to change when it happens gradually rather than suddenly. There is also the question of whether you should ever have a direct conversation about ending a relationship. That depends on the situation. If the person is genuinely unaware of how they affect you and you believe they are capable of change, an honest but gentle conversation can sometimes help. But if history shows that they respond poorly to feedback, it is often better to step back without confrontation. A long-term friendship study conducted by UCLA found that direct confrontations over friendship issues often resulted in hostility rather than resolution. People rarely change because they are told to. They change when they feel it is in their best interest to do so. If someone demands an explanation for why you are distancing yourself, the key is to keep it simple and neutral. Avoid blaming them or listing all their faults. Instead, say something like, "I have been focusing on some personal things and need to take a step back for now." This way, you set a boundary without inviting further debate. If they push for more details, repeat the same message without elaboration. Studies on boundary setting show that people are more likely to respect limits when they see that pushing further will not get them a different response. The most important thing to remember is that taking space for yourself is not rude. It is necessary. Just because someone has been in your life for a long time does not mean they are entitled to your time and energy forever. Life is short, and every moment spent in the wrong company is a moment you could have spent on something more fulfilling. By politely but firmly creating distance, you are not just protecting yourself from unnecessary stress. You are making room for healthier, more meaningful connections.